Hi, we continue in Genesis 45 and come to the end of our unit that you can see on the right side of the green box showing the two chiasms, the one that goes from the beginning of chapter 42 to the end of chapter 42, and the one we've been following here that starts at the beginning of chapter 43 and it goes right through the end of the chapter that we're on now. And we can see there are parallels with the journey from Jacob sending his sons to the sons reporting back to Jacob, and the arrival and departure from Egypt, and the two audiences with Joseph in the center of the custody. So we're coming near the end of that and the dramatic reunion we've been seeing in this chapter. And as we do, we're going to see Pharaoh for the first time in a long time. So let's look at the shape of our story and we'll see how a couple little chiasms shape our unit today. So we looked at this chiasm last time, and note how, although we looked at this verse, these couple little verses sit between the chiasms, one following up with the sound of the brothers kissing and talking there that you can see, and the other, the response of the sound being heard in Pharaoh's house that sends Pharaoh here. So here we'll see Joseph's instructions of the brothers, and here we'll see Pharaoh's instructions of the brothers. Here we see the brothers, described here as the sons of Israel, doing it. And then finally they'll get to Canaan and get to Jacob, and Jacob will say, "Get me to my son Joseph." And so let's just jump right into our scene, starting in verse 15, which we looked at 14 last time. He fell on his brother's neck, Benjamin's neck, and wept, and while Benjamin wept upon his neck. And we simply didn't stop before verse 15. So although it's repetitive in the sense of kissed the brothers and wept them, and we looked last time already at the parallel in Genesis 33:4 of Jacob and Esau's reunion, then there's a surprising little ending here. And after that, his brothers talk to him. And although Turner suggests that's completing the reconciliation of the breach begun at 37:4, my note below continues, although there is no specific word from them in response to Joseph's disclosure, an explanation/interpretation. As well as it's an interesting example of in a story that I've been showing full of tellings and retellings, here there's something not told. We don't know the substance of it, what they're talking about here. So we don't know. All we know is the one sense that they were stunned when they recognized Joseph. We hear nothing else of the response. And we hear nothing else of the response now as they're sent back. What can we imagine they must be feeling? Because that's what we have to imagine, since the writer has not given us the brother's perspective, simply giving us Joseph's perspective and Pharaoh's perspective. They're almost certainly speechless because it's just all too much for them to take in. But as we'll see, they do what they're told and head back to Canaan as Joseph told them to do. So when the report was heard, literally the sound was heard, matching in verse 2, where we heard the sound of the weeping was heard there. So note that this is in another house. They were in Joseph's house, and this is in the house next door. But probably shouldn't think of that as whatever size the house you live in, if you live in a house, and the one next door. These are the houses of Pharaoh, whose very name Pharaoh means great house, and of Joseph, who's described himself as the ruler over all of Egypt. So these are magnificent buildings, something more like the White House in the United States, an office building and a huge complex. So to be heard in the house next door is not just like through the wall and across the yard, but it must have been a tremendous loud sound. Although this time it's not the crying that you can expect is loud, but simply the conversation. Perhaps it's simply they hear the sound of them weeping and together, as we just saw in the previous scene. So the response to that, the New RSV has Pharaoh and his servants were pleased, but literally, as you can see on the right side, it was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and his servants. A common Hebrew phrase, it was good in the eyes of, the New RSV, for whatever reason, almost always covers up. So having good in their eyes, now suddenly Pharaoh talks to Joseph, and we have to recognize a couple of things here. Joseph was in the house with the brothers, and Pharaoh was in the house with his own slaves. Now Pharaoh's talking to Joseph about the brothers. So there's two possibilities here. Either Pharaoh has summoned Joseph next door, and we just haven't heard about that, or more likely Pharaoh is talking to Joseph in Egyptian in front of the brothers and telling him to say it, telling Joseph to repeat it to the brothers, because Pharaoh doesn't speak Aramaic or Hebrew or whatever it is we're imagining the brothers are speaking here. Obviously in the text everybody's speaking Hebrew. So that's what we must imagine here. And so in that sense, it's much more likely that Pharaoh came over to Joseph's house, since we see no call for Pharaoh over there. But highlighting again the separation by language, and to the extent the brothers are being invited in here, we need to remember this is a place where Egyptians find an abomination to eat with Hebrews. And as we'll see when Jacob says his occupation is a shepherd, shepherds as a category are also an abomination to Egyptians, as they are to many urban imperial people for being dirty and lower class, etc. So there are many hints in the story that although we're seeing the generous invitation to come, you'll get the best, it's not coming into the same kind of setting that they were promised with Yahweh earlier in the book. So say to your brothers, do this. And the phrase do this is repeated twice here, and we see it again in verse 19, helping to form some of the little chiasm you can see in this box over here. So notice Pharaoh is giving Joseph's commands, and we have to ask, what is Pharaoh's authority over Joseph at this point? Joseph, as we saw earlier here, described himself not only as Lord over all Egypt, but God has made me a father to Pharaoh. So at least in Joseph's language, he's in charge and Pharaoh is under him. And that can only be imagined to be the case since Joseph holds the key to making making profit off the famine, and Pharaoh is beholden to him. And yet here now Pharaoh is giving him directions in the imperative voice. Say to your brothers, do this. So it's imperative to Joseph, and what he tells Joseph to tell to the brothers is also in the imperative. Load your animals, using an unusual word here, ba'ir, only here in Genesis, and only a few other times in the Torah, and then once in Psalms, but not connected. And go back to the land of Canaan. Simple enough. Joseph's already told him that. We already said that back here, so hurry and bring my father down. But now he adds, take your father and your households, plural here, expressing the previously unnarrated fact of the brothers' women and children. And I only took note of that, even though the text does it, to highlight how much food would be involved, and I estimated it around 50 people. We'll see at the beginning of Exodus, the end of Genesis is described as 70, but that's a nice holy round number too, so we don't have to initially take that literally. But certainly women and children who have been left back at Canaan, and we have to imagine too, what are they thinking about their fathers or husbands being gone all this time and going off to Egypt? They must have been worried they wouldn't come back, but we never hear their perspective. So take your father and your households and come to me, so I may give you the best of the land of Egypt. And as my note below has, can we hear a parallel ambiguity to the Hittites' seemingly generous offer back in 23:11? Let's go back and look at that scene just for a moment and remember how it sounds to most ordinary readers here when the Hittites say, no, my lord, hear me. I give you the field and I give you the cave that is in it. In the presence of my people, I give it to you, bury your dead. And Abraham seems to argue with him, if you will only listen to me. And we recognized last time, or not last time, but in chapter 23, that this offer is wide open, but it's not specific. He doesn't intend to give him the field. He's going to sell it to him. And of course, as you can see, even on this scene currently on there, he does, with the silver counted out, 400 shekels of silver. Worth noting, because in the scene we're going to see, Joseph's going to give Benjamin 300 shekels of silver. So the callback to this echo here may well be to connect us with the shekels of silver here. That was a piece of land with a cave on it. Just a little more silver than what Joseph gives Benjamin, seemingly for nothing here. So we have to at least consider whether this is really an offer to give or whether there's a hook like there was from the Hittites back in chapter 23. The best of the land of Egypt. And best is a refrain in this section. It was only in chapter 24 earlier. We can see it back there here. Setting out the best gifts from his master, described here as choice. So that was Abraham's servant, bringing those to Laban in a similar situation here. And I really want to note the similar situation because, as we'll see, it's the wagons that will lead Jacob to believe that the message from the brothers is true and that he must get up in his old age and go to Egypt to meet his son. So, give you the best of the land of Egypt, and you may enjoy the fat of the land. We hear the word for fat, chelev, only with Abel's offering back in chapter 4:4. So, a big call back there. The fat of the land that was accepted from Yahweh by Abel when the produce from the agricultural offering from Cain was not. Does this imply something other than agriculture? Almost certainly not. Egypt is almost all agriculture here, in contrast to Jacob, as I noted, who were shepherds. Then he speaks again, and usually that kind of narrator introduction to a speech in the middle of a speech with the same character suggests some time has passed. We don't see any reason for time being passed, so we'll just continue. Your further charge are to literally make this order, as I have on the right side, and this is the center of the little chiasm. Do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your women. As my note below has, wagons is agaloth, only in this episode in Genesis, and we see it here in the verse in 21, and then in 27, as I was noting, when Jacob sees them. And as my note further has, only the wagons adds to verse 18. So why the specification of house as little ones and women? The point being here, he says, take your households come to me, but the women and your little ones is your household. So perhaps that's just stylistically to make the little chiasm here, or to be clear that he meant your little ones and your wives. And bring your father and come. And then he continues, give no thought to your possessions. The term here, acheves, is only here in Genesis, and it literally means pity or compassion, an odd word to have in relation to possessions. It's in Deuteronomy only negatively, and also negatively in Ezekiel. We won't go to all those, though. But it contrasts a little bit with Joseph's command that we saw back in verse 10, you shall settle in the land of Goshen with all that you have. So Joseph tells them to bring all they have, but Pharaoh says, don't worry about it. You'll get everything you need here, presumably to lighten the load of the travel, that you don't need to carry all your personal belongings with you on the road to Egypt. For the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. What does that mean exactly, the best of all the land of Egypt? We've already seen Joseph promise him Goshen, which is on the edge of the arable land and is traditionally understood all the way back to the 13th century BCE to be a place where the Egyptians allowed migrating nomadic shepherds to travel on the land, obviously to get the benefit of the fertilization of the poop from all their animals, without having the shepherds in the cities and amongst their people. So is that what Pharaoh means, or does he mean something other than what Joseph promised as Goshen? We'll have to wait and see. But in Pharaoh's standpoint, it sounds like they're offering the choice, much like Abraham, or much like God did to Abraham in saying, look all around you. Or perhaps even like Abram did to Lot, look around you and you pick. And then Lot saw the well-watered plain, and that got him caught up in Sodom. So that's all the ambiguities of Pharaoh's instructions, and we see no response from the sons. Notice this, what's intervening here we don't hear is Joseph telling the sons this. We see it here. Joseph gave them wagons according to the instruction of Pharaoh, but we see that the sons of Israel did so before we hear that Joseph translated the Egyptian instructions of Pharaoh and gave them to the brothers. But we see no response either to if they're in the presence of Pharaoh, to that magnificent thing from their perspective of just being ordinary people, to be in the presence of the head of the greatest empire in the world of their time, or if it's just a message and he's in the other building, just to the generosity of the king of Egypt offering them the best of the land. But all we hear is they do so. And it's phrased in terms of sons of Israel, which is the second time we're hearing this in this unit. We saw it at the beginning of this unit in 42:5. And as my note has, the repeated title in place of the brothers pushes toward the Exodus and reminds readers of the consequences of listening to Joseph rather than Yahweh. And I can't hammer that point home often enough in the light of scholars who continue to interpret this like Joseph is God's hero and saving the brothers and doing something wonderful, as opposed to leading them directly into slavery in Egypt. And I really want to note that, because if we just had the Exodus book by itself, without the introduction provided certainly by the authors of the Joseph story that provide the link, we just find them inexplicably in Egypt as slaves. And as I note in my book, Come Out My People, and I've noting in the videos on Samuel, and we'll note in the videos on 1 Kings, the Exodus story can easily be read as something to support Jeroboam's rebellion against Solomon's son Rehoboam, with the three pharaohs corresponding to David, Solomon, and Rehoboam. That would be the case if we didn't have the later written book of Genesis. But the book of Genesis suggests here, and almost explicitly, that the reason that the Israelites end up being slaves in Egypt is because they listened to Joseph rather than listening to God. And that's a key point here over against those who would read Joseph as the hero and this is a happy story, rather than a tragic story of abandoning the land of promise, abandoning the covenant, and abandoning Yahweh to be beholden to the Egyptians and their brother, who's now the ruler of all of Egypt. And we will see the consequence of that very explicitly in chapter 47. We don't have to get to Exodus to find that out. So perhaps that's why they're being called sons of Israel, because it's otherwise translated as Israelites throughout the Exodus story. So the sons of Israel did so, and Joseph gave them wagons according to the instruction of Pharaoh, literally the mouth of Pharaoh, and he gave them provisions for the journey, tzedakah, which we've seen a couple times before. And then he adds, and again he adds to help out Benjamin, and again they have no response. To each of them he gave a set of garments, or it could be translated a change of clothes, halaphoth, only here in the Pentateuch. noting its matching Sephamoth, making up for Genesis 37:34, where his clothes were torn. But to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver, as I was just noting, in comparison with the 400 through which Abraham bought the land in which Sarai was buried, and in fact where Jacob will be buried as well, and 5 sets of garments matching the 5-fold food portion. But no response to the 5 sets of garments for Benjamin and the amazing amount of money. And to his father he sent the following: 10 donkeys loaded with the best of Egypt. Who knows why the NRSV translates 2 of there, which we saw earlier in 18 and 20 as best, and now reduces it to good things, but the best things of Egypt. And 10 female donkeys loaded with grain, bread, and provision for his father for the journey. The word mazon for provision here is only in a couple other places. It's not the word for provision we saw earlier, but it doesn't seem to have any particular other meaning. And so now he sends them on their way, again with no response to them. And as they were leaving, he said to them, "Do not quarrel along the way." And the word for quarrel, impossible to pronounce without the vowels, RGZ, only here in Genesis, but 42 times in Hebrew Scripture, once in Exodus and Deuteronomy, both as tremble. According to the rabbis, it means not to be afraid of caravan robbers or of returning to Egypt for fear of future treatment, according to Wenham. Aviva Gottlieb Zornberg notes this in her usual manner. Roges, as she pronounced the term with the vowels, is thus a peculiarly human, indeed moral response to the discomfort of shame, a radical agitation, a disturbance of the narrative one tells oneself. And she says that tracing the experience back to Jacob's first awareness of Joseph's appearance. And so with that, they head back to Canaan. And I'll keep the return in a separate video, even though it'll be short, so we can highlight the amazing thing of Jacob discovering that his long-lost son Joseph's alive. See you for that next time. Bye-bye.